12 millimeters. Whoa, 24 millimeters. That's, no, too wide. Here we go. That's good enough. 14-ish millimeters, sure. We'll go with that. Hello, everyone. Now we're talking about tires today. Specifically 1 or 2 tires. But we're also gonna talk about tires in general. Not this one. This is a pint tire. My Onewheel XR is actually in the car, and the car's not home, and so I'm doing this with just a prop tire. Now, this video is gonna end up being in 2 parts. First, I'm gonna be talking about what I believe is the best tire for the Onewheel XR for me, given my particular uses of the board. Now, that doesn't mean that it will be the perfect tire for you, although it is generally the tire that I recommend because it's pretty much the most medium tire that I've so far used. And that's the Hoosier 11 by 6.0 inch, 6-inch Hoosier 11 by 6-6 tire in D10A rubber compound. I love that tire. I have it on my Onewheel now. I will use it again when that one wears out. And it is one that I think you should try if you are about to change your tire. Now, one thing about this model of tire is it is actually offered in more than one rubber compound. The one that I like to use is the D10A. It is the softest. However, it's also made in a D20A and a D30A in increasing levels of rubber hardness or durometer rating. That will change the sound of the tire on the ground or the road. It will change the durability and the longevity of the tire. And generally, from the way I ride, I will prefer a softer rubber compound for the sake of increased grip and a little bit of a quieter ride, even though it's not going to be as durable or as long lasting. So why do I recommend that tire? Well, it's relatively quiet. It is a decent mix of stable and turn-ish. And since it is a bit lighter than the stock Vega tire, it does give you a bit more response with your acceleration and braking and a little bit more range over the stock Vega. Now, a tire that I used to ride is the Hoosier Flight Fins Whisper, and that's a very popular tire, and it's actually very close of a tire to the generic Hoosier 11 by 6. If you're deciding between those 2 tires, they're almost the same. There are a couple of key differences between the 2, and they really just relate to the tire profile. Tire profiles can change slightly from batch to batch. I've noticed that some of the Hoosier tires have a slightly more rounded profile than batches of tires made the next year or even in the later half of a year. And so you're gonna have a little bit of variation from batch to batch depending on when and from where you buy the tire. That being said, generally I've noticed the Flight Fins Whisper version of this tire to be slightly more flat in the middle and the generic version to be not necessarily rounder in the middle, but the flat spot in the middle is currently a little bit more narrow. Last year, this tire, the generic tire, was actually entirely rounded across the entire face of the tire, and so it was slightly less stable with a bit more turning ability than the Whisper. And so the difference between the 2 would be, do you want something that's more stable in straight line, or do you want something that can turn a bit easier with a little bit less effort? Currently, they're both more or less the same, and so really the difference between the 2 is going to be both price and how that relates to your idea of value and their stability and turning ability. In terms of rubber compound, I've tested them both. They're essentially identical. In terms of weight, I've weighed them both. Anyone can weigh them both. They're essentially identical. There is, of course, variation from sample to sample, but generally speaking, they are the same tire, except in terms of profile and price. And so that's going to be the major difference between the 2 if you're choosing one or the other, the Flight Fins branded one or the generic one. I'm going to go ahead and move the camera for this next segment so it feels like it's way more personal. And we're going to go sit by the tires over here, and we're going to talk about tire choosing. This is such a stupid idea. The real difference when it comes to most tires in practice is entirely personal. There are empirical things that you can measure between tires. There's rubber compound durometer, there is the profile shape and how that would respond to use, and there's also ease of installation, which is why I tend to like Hoosiers more. They are much easier to install and take off of the rim. If it happens to be that you've got only one board and you need that tire changed today in order for you to go ride tomorrow, then ease of installation does matter, especially if you are everything's beeping, especially if you are new to doing maintenance on your own board and someone who has more experience or expertise, or a one-wheel shop, repair shop is not local to you or available at the moment. What I have noticed is that for the most part, any tire that you put on your one wheel, you'll get used to in usually less than 10 miles. It's a very short adjustment period when it comes to one being more turnish than the other, when it comes to one being more stable, whether it has slightly more grip or a little bit less response or more response or whatever the case may be. Honestly, if you go from an aftermarket tire back to a stock Vega, it will probably not be the best feeling ride that you've had on the board, but honestly, you would get used to it and you would just deal with it, and eventually the difference of the tire will go away. And that simple fact means that it doesn't matter all that much what tire you go with. Of course, after a while of riding, you will develop preferences, but honestly, the difference is that those preferences are usually based upon are relatively subtle. So if I had on my board the generic Hoosier, or I had a Whisper, or I had the Float Life Street Pro, I would get used to them all, so would most folks who are riding, and really the main difference that it comes down to is price, availability, and other non-empirical things that might matter to you when it comes to purchasing one-wheel accessories and aftermarket parts. You may want to support one brand over another, and that's totally fine. You might want to support one style of some kind of accessory over another, and that's also fine too. These are your decisions, it's your money, and it all rolls into what you perceive as value or not. That was a stupid idea. Oh, now I'm back on 12 millimeters. Whoop, there we go. Okay, which tire should you buy for the Onewheel XR? I'll tell you what tire I will buy again. It will most likely be the Hoosier 11x6-6 in D10, a compound, because I like that tire. It's done everything I needed it to do, and it rides really, really well. Is it the most durable? Absolutely not. If you ride over very, very harsh terrain, you will likely damage this tire, at which point you will need tire plugs, tire sealant, whatever. And when it comes to the budgetary constraints of making content, I currently cannot afford to buy more and more tires like I did for the pint tire video. That was a very expensive, very time-consuming video, and so things change and I can't afford to test every single tire. So currently I'm sticking with what works. However, if you have found a tire that works, stick with that. Or if it's your thing, try more tires. If there is a specific tire you want to see tested on the channel, I am more than open to testing any and all tires, given it shows up and I have the time and the schedule to do that, as long as it's a slick tire. I have tried 3 different treaded tires and I am not a fan. Sorry. And that essentially covers everything I wanted to say on the issue of tires. I really appreciate your viewership. I hope this video helped or at least entertained you. If it did not and you thought that this content was awful, hit the dislike button twice. In the description below are links to my blog, my web store, and my Patreon should you wish to support me in other ways. And as always, don't fall, or try not to.